the after lunch session is normally quite interesting. It tends to sort of get to that end of the day, but we'll try and keep it fresh and exciting after the discussions we've had. So today we're going to talk about moving from a practice of being prepared for an instant response to generally being prepared and getting ready for when a response comes. And I'll do it in three phases. So I'll just start by talking about the threat landscape. What's going on in the world right now? What do we see in the threat landscape? What's happening? And then at the end of it, I will talk about the 3 steps or 3 strategies that I'm talking to clients about running or going through in 2025. So before all that, where did my journey start? About, here we go. About 10 to 11 years ago, I was state manager in a fleet management company. Things were going well. And watching a YouTube video, naturally I'm a car fan, and I promised I wouldn't talk about cars today because the theme is about gaming, so I'll try and keep it in that world. But I watched a YouTube video about 10 years ago from Wired magazine, where basically a car driving down a freeway got hacked remotely. And for those of you that look into the future and the flow of the future, about 2012, 2014, we all thought the fleet of yellow cabs and taxis will be a fleet of driverless cars by 2024, 2025. So at that point in time, I thought, if that's where we're going, where we have driverless cars, and these guys can hack a car on a freeway and get it moving, what's going to happen if someone hacks into a driverless car and you're helpless? Now, 2 years later, I found myself having started a master's in IT, specializing in cybersecurity, and the story carries on to where we are today. Now, back in history, famous quote by Benjamin Franklin, he said, "Nothing in life is certain except death and taxes." True to form, those are certain in life today. But I want to change that and sort of like cap it and own it on my own and say, in today's world, nothing in life is certain except death, taxes, and cyber attacks. So what do I mean and where are we going? Last year alone, there's been an increase of cyber attacks by about 40%. So we've seen a 40% increase in cyber attacks. And of that 40%, supply chain has been the biggest contributor. So anyone and everyone pretty much is connected to someone these days. We do businesses via third party, we do business via vendors, we network, we change, we exchange data. Now, pretty much like COVID, any close proximity or, if you're within range or connection with anybody, you're most likely going to contract or receive or get passed on whatever cyber threat they have. So that's been the biggest contributor, supply chain incidents. Now, besides supply chain being the biggest thing, the shocking statistic out there from a study done by Saka is that 64% of companies that have owned up. Bear in mind, the theory is that 30% of the companies are the ones that report and do surveys. So the other 70% don't report. But of the companies that have been attacked, 64% of them had never done a cyber tabletop exercise. So they'd never done a dry run of what do we do if we get cyber attacked. Let me put that into a bit more of perspective. So the cost of a cyber attack on average in the Asia Pacific region is about the value of a waterfront house in the northern beaches. 4.5 million has been the average attack within Australia and New Zealand. Now, the biggest thing about that is, and what is that telling us? It's telling us that it doesn't matter how big you are. We purely cannot afford to have a cyber attack or to be attacked. Now, 20% of businesses that have cyber attacked over the last year have actually closed doors. So we're talking of the impact of the financial impact of a cost leading to companies closing doors. It doesn't end there. From that 20% or from that 4.5 million, we're talking about the reputation of the company, trust across the industry and across other businesses. So surely getting a cyber attack is not ideal, and we don't want to go that way. Now, all right, so what do we do? What do we do to get prepared? How do we run through being prepared? Now, I'm sure most of us, if not all of us, already do a cyber tabletop exercise. once a year, we do it, and every business has a incident response plan or a playbook, and again, we update that once a year. The playbook has become static. The tabletops are normally comprised of ransomware, maybe a data breach here and there, perhaps the normal standard playbook, but year on year, we're repeating the same process, the same practice, and the same tabletop. Whereas in the threat landscape, things are changing. We had Lee talk about how he was watching game. We had the previous panel talk about artificial intelligence. In that 60% that I spoke about, the biggest number of threats came from AI-generated attacks. We've also heard about deepfake videos or companies or people paying out thousands of dollars or millions of dollars because they've attended a team with their boss who turned out not to be their boss. So the threat landscape is changing. It's not staying static. Now, by doing your once-in-a-year tabletop exercise and updating your playbooks once a year, we're staying behind of the time. And we will never catch up and we'll never get up to where the threat landscape is. So the other thing that we do as well is businesses sort of run these exercises across the IT team. Perhaps you'll have an HR person, perhaps you have your CFO, financial person there, but it's really IT focused. But given that, that example there, where a $4.5 million cost stops being an IT problem, it's now a business problem. We need to start looking at how does the business get involved in becoming how does business get involved in becoming incident response as well? Right, it just reminds me of a story. Anyone that's looked after a toddler, what I call a pre-teen or a 3-teen or a 14, you'd understand this. You can prepare for any incident. Multiple times I've got a toddler myself that I've asked whether or not they want to go to the bathroom while I'm changing her, before we get in the car. And the straight answer is no, I don't need it. True to form, 5 minutes down the road, she'll want to go to the bathroom in the middle of the freeway where there's no bathrooms and nothing to do. It doesn't help that she's a girl. So the biggest example or the biggest time when I saw we're being ready and having practice of this, I remember a couple of months ago, I was flying back into Australia from a holiday, and sitting alongside the aisle was a lady that had a toddler of her own. I felt a bit comfortable because I knew, okay, I've got a toddler, she's got a toddler. But what happened next, I was not prepared for. And I'm glad it happened to her, not me. While taxiing off the runway, seatbelts down, plane is slowly moving and we're being told it's about to take off. Her kid tells her she needs to go to the bathroom. You cannot stand up and this kid carries on, I need to go to the bathroom. Now over the next, what felt to me like was a week long, which was probably 45 seconds, I watched this lady get a pull-up diaper, strap it on a kid while the plane is taking off and going up, straight into the clouds. And by the time we were sort of cruising to altitude, the kid had gone to the bathroom in a diaper, still while seated in a seatbelt. Now, surely I thought, it doesn't matter how much practice I have. This lady had to be in a situation where you could throw anything at her and she was prepared to react and think on a fit, which she did. Now, that's where we need to be when it comes to incident response. We need to be prepared for anything that comes. The threat landscape is changing. We need to be prepared for responding to any incident. We need to be prepared to be reactive to any incident, and we need to be prepared to be proactive when an incident comes. Now, how on earth do we do that? And what are we looking at over the next 25 years? So I've started having this conversation about how to be prepared. Now, here's the 3 things. If there's anything you're going to take away today, it's these 3 things. The first thing we need to look at is right up there. We need to start running, at least at a bare minimum, quarterly tabletop exercises. Nothing big. If you're doing it once a year, we're looking at least running them quarterly, an hour to about 90 minutes, 1 to 1.5 hour running tabletop exercises. Now, if you run them quarterly, the next step is you need to update your playbooks on a quarterly basis as well. They can't afford to be static. So we need to run these playbooks. So every time you run a tabletop exercise, we need to update our playbook accordingly. Now, the second part about this is we now need to rotate and have focused war room exercises across the board. Don't just run a ransomware playbook. Run a runaway tabletop today or a ransomware war room. However, in your next session, make that about AI. How are we going to respond if you get a deepfake threat or you have an artificial intelligence threat coming through? What about that supply chain? If you remember, I spoke about the biggest contribution to incident response is supply chain. What do you do if your key partner or key vendor is attacked? What do you do if your key application or key service goes down and you can't work? It's not your fault, it's not your cyber attack, but it's a cyber incident response that's been contributed by a third party. How are we working with our supply chain to make sure that everyone is incident response ready? Are we having the conversations with them about what to do next? And how do we work together? How do we collaborate if an incident happens? So we now start need to spreading our tabletop exercises across our supply chain, across our networks, and getting everyone on board with that. Now, the key part about it is, as soon as you do your tabletop, we need to refine those playbooks. Don't just leave them to be a static, document across the whole year. Now, look, once a year tabletop works. If you're looking to tick that compliance tabletop, that's what's required. But if you're looking to move from a practice to a preparedness, we now need to start having that transition and that multiple playbooks. Now, the second thing we want to talk about is how do we make playbooks and incident response a business issue and not just an IT issue? Now, we need to start including all departments into incident response. And when I say all departments, I'm talking about from reception to the tea lady, if you have one. We just had an example where we did a physical intrusion. I think I just started, it was one of my first gigs, the one Prashant was talking about. That came from the coffee shop downstairs. Now, within your business, we now need to start having little cyber security tabletops across the business. Start with finance, start with HR, start as long as it's somewhere. And across those quarterly playbooks, why not throw in monthly stand-up war rooms, monthly stand-up playbooks across the different departments? Make it fun. And for those of you that are time conscious or time poor, everyone has to do a cybersecurity incident awareness training. Why not include a mini little tabletop across the departments? Now, why did I get this idea and why am I pushing that through transition? We all heard, I think someone mentioned the blue screen of death that we experienced in June, July, CrowdStrike. Now, one of the key clients that I had run tabletops with biannually was telling me how their HR department reconnected employees with IT. Now, we remember what happened. It was a Friday afternoon. I remember I was in a meeting with Amila, and my computer just died. Yes, I do. Now, with this organization, they had about 200 people that worked remotely and another 150 that they had sent off home to say, look, systems are down. We have no idea what's happened. Let's go. Now, thankfully for this organization, in their incident response team was someone from HR. Now, if we remember, one of the key solutions provided by CrowdStrike was to say, hey, you actually need to have someone log into every device and physically delete that update and then restart your machine, et cetera, et cetera. Now, how do these guys communicate with the rest of the business? With privacy laws, they had no phone numbers. They couldn't access people's phone numbers to call people and say, hey, look, this is what you do. They couldn't send their work email because, they can't access their work email. Out of the 450, they probably had about 50 or 60 work phones. Now, the solution came from that HR person, that incident response team, and said, hey, hang on. We actually have physical copies of our staff records. And to avoid a breach or to avoid us breaching privacy laws, why don't I get my HR team and we ring up people and work together with someone from IT to help them? So throughout that first weekend, they started ringing people on their personal phones from HR. So it was perfectly within compliance because it's HR that's calling and saying, hey, look, I've got Shepard, I've got whoever it is from the IT team. We need to work and resolve this. I think, don't quote me, I think it was end of day Monday or Tuesday. They had their whole organization back to work and working. But that solution came from HR. Now, again, a good example of why we need to integrate incident response across the businesses. If a financial application or tool, or if the breach comes from the finance side, the person that's going to see a quick anomaly and respond that is someone in finance. It's not going to come from IT. And that's going to help us identify those cracks. I talk about companies with call centers, and I always emphasize why we need to have someone from the call center come into an incident response tabletop exercise. If the business is to be breached, customers call in to say, hey, hang on, what's happening? What's going on? Now, if our call center is not trained on what to do, surely you can have a message that you send across the call center. However, in the spur of the moment and in the IT team or incident response team trying to respond, it helps having trained people within that call center to say, this is what we tell our staff, this is the messaging we pass across until we hear from the incident response team. So the importance of emphasizing that incident response is across the business and including everyone. Now, the third thing is we need to actually stay ahead. We now need to start incorporating AI-driven injects or threats as part of our response and tabletop exercises. We now need to start thinking outside the box. How do we simulate those third-party vendor supply chain breaches and vendor compromises? How do we work or include our third parties, our partners, and everyone else into incident response playbooks? And it's not far-fetched. How do we then have a joint incident response plan or a task, or how do we then create a joint incident response team, and who does what when with our vendors as well? So it's really, really critical not just to take vendors on board and do a third-party vendor test and say, hang on, we've checked them, they're ISO certified, we're grand. It's also important to start thinking about, we are connected by the hip to these people. How do we work together to resolve incidents? Now, as we know, incidents continuously evolved. Therefore, our playbooks and our incident response plan need to continuously evolve as well. So every time we run a tabletop exercise, I can't emphasize enough the importance of updating our playbooks alongside with that. All right, so of course, we need to engage our leadership in all this. We need to start simulating threats that are relevant to the business, and we need to updating our response plans effectively as well. One of the key tabletops that I've been running as well this past 12 months has been a board level exercise as well. So we had a question before about engaging the board. What's the board's role? What do they do? How do we engage them during a tabletop exercise? Do we know how frequent they need to be informed? So from that board level right down to, call it reception or call center level, we need to start engaging the business as well. So what are the key takeaways and where am I driving, or what strategy am I talking to clients again? So just a quick recap. We now need to start conducting frequent, immersive, and evolving war rooms. They don't need to be big or long. Run quarterly major exercises. Perhaps engage a third-party expert like us for 2 of them, and you can still run 2 of them internally as well. But you need to have a major tabletop or war room exercise once a quarter. For me, playbooks are living documents. They need to be updated every time you run that playbook. But to foster a culture of automatic or cross-department cyber resilience, I'm starting to recommend why not have monthly sessions across the different departments. Again, they don't need to be long, half an hour, combined with the security awareness training. It's serious stuff, but you can make it fun as well. We just heard about how one of the biggest weaknesses around cyber threats or cyber events is actually the human aspect of things. So engaging them in that annual cyber security awareness training is not enough in this changing landscape. So we need to start running short sessions, sweet and short sessions, but informational and serious ones as well. Now, again, continuous evolvement and continuous change. The threat landscape is changing, and unless if we start doing those short practices and running that across, we won't be across the board. All right, any questions? We are way ahead of time. I sped through that, but
Any questions, Shab?
Yeah.
In terms of, you're probably seeing it, we've got some OT guys here now, I guess.
OT?
Yeah.
Yes, good.
Are you seeing more cohesion between IT and OT in terms of incident response planning, tabletop exercises, or are they still doing their own things separately?
Well, very good question. Although I want to expand that to say OT, IT are still very much siloed. But when it comes to cyber incidents, my experience and what I'm seeing across the industries is it's still very much siloed across even the organizations itself. you hear businesses talking about corporate IT. It's purely corporate. It's not talking about the applications. It's not talking about any other systems outside. It's not including anything that outside that corporate network, outside your email, your network. And OT is a whole different ballgame altogether. And I'm sure most businesses, some are starting to have that transition, but it's always that debate of who owns incident response, right? It's run and owned by IT. However, we're starting to see OT. Now, the biggest challenge I've seen from my experience with OT is that a lot of the OT departments still run, what's the word for it, older version legacy tools, sorry, that's the word I'm looking for, legacy applications. There's this belief that, in OT, we are off-grid, we're off the network, so we won't be impacted. But in reality, we know that's not quite true. So that's the challenge we see with OT, where they're very focused and say, look, we don't connect to the internet, we're independent of that, so we won't get affected or impacted. But the trend is starting to grow. But the biggest challenge I've seen is that ownership within IT. I'm not quite, that high up the pay grade, but I would recommend either sharing that ownership with OT, start to introduce that cyber within OT, and running these exercises together as well. So the challenge, I think I've run 3 or 4 this year alone, OT, IT engagements, and the challenge comes down to ownership. There's one person who owns the system or the application, and then there's one person who's in charge of running cyber. Yeah, but the silos don't just stop at OT, IT, they go across departments as well. Prashant. Yes. No, go. Yeah.
Like just following on from Chris's question, you've done so many incident response
Yes.
tabletop exercises. Across all of them, do you see anything like very common theme every time, like a recurring trend that you see?
In terms of weaknesses or in terms of findings?
Whatever that is.
Well, yeah, what we normally find is when you run tabletop exercises, I usually emphasize within the first 3 slides, it is an open book exercise. Please pull up your incident response plan or playbook. I now have come to accept the fact that the incident response plans or playbooks are not living documents within the teams. They seem to be a compliance tick box exercise. And even when the team gets stuck, you prompt them and say, what does your playbook say? What does your incident response plan say? And it starts off with, when people come, you'll probably have 2 people that either have a device or laptop or a printed copy of an incident response playbook. So that's sort of like a common theme that I've seen, that in as much as we have incident response playbooks and plans in the business, they're not really being used during an incident response. That's the key one that I'm seeing. The second one, which is another one I'm trying to change the culture, we get a big request for, let's have a ransomware playbook. Now, I've figured out that is because the last or biggest breach that happened 3 months ago is a ransomware playbook, and we don't know anything, so let's do that. However, there's, it's open season when it comes to the threat landscapes. There's a lot more things we can test and try and run for tabletop and war rooms exercise as well. And the last trend is the one I spoke about. It's, in as much as you request to have different people or different teams involved in a tabletop exercises are usually run by the IT department or team. And we're starting to get a lot of increase and interest from like an executive to a board level. Again, I think it's because that, is it a law now or a policy that the board is now responsible for attacks? So we started to seeing that increase as well.
One more.
Yeah. I'm actually more comfortable answering questions than running the... Yes.
With incident response plan, when you conduct TTX, do you often see playbooks are already there, or is it just a master incident response plan and then?
Yeah.
Because playbook, I mean, give or take, it's still a new concept for many organizations.
Yes, you're right.
Particular incident or scenario. So,
Yeah.
what are your observations?
All right. So my usual talk is about the differences between the different types of tabletops. Now, I interchangeably use the word tabletop and war room. The trend that we're seeing is that a lot of people are being more reactional than proactive. So tabletops are being done because, like I said, there's been a breach with this company who's our competitor or a peer in the industry, and we haven't done a tabletop, or there's this compliance requirement to do a tabletop, so let's do it. And what we started seeing as a trend is that my normal question when we're doing scoping is, can I review your incident response playbook? Do you want us to include reviewing your plan or playbook as part of that? It's a 50-50 question. Some people will have an incident response plan that's been there for years, hasn't been updated. It's got an annual date of update, but what it is, oh yeah, we've checked the incident response playbook and we've probably changed the contacts. And that's pretty much the most update that we've done. So in my books, they don't have an incident response plan because it's not current, but it's 50-50. Now, other people don't have incident response plans at all, but they now need to do an incident tabletop exercise. So what I've done in other talks is actually talking about if you don't have a plan or if you have a very outdated incident response plan or a playbook, run what we call a tabletop exercise. It's very high level, very detailed to say, okay, if we get attacked, who does what when? So you going through that process to determine the process of how that playbook will be done. So that's what I determine as a tabletop exercise. Very high level. It includes like IT executive, probably a sponsor, the CFO, or whoever it is to represent the board. Then you get into my world, which is what I would like to call a war room exercise. So once you have that incident response plan and tabletop and incident response playbooks, you've started sort of like maturing them. They've reached a maturity stage where you feel, okay, we're fairly confident this playbook works. Then you run what we call a detailed war room scenario. And I normally call that like the boot camp exercise, where we come in, split it across. We have one technical exercise or war room exercise, and it's very technical. We're working with Sasha and team from the Red Team, where we simulate or emulate an incident that's happened in the last 6 months closely and very technical. Then we run with a non-technical members of the incident response team. So we're talking about someone from comms, we're talking about someone from HR, we're talking about the CFO, the executive team level, marketing. And what we're doing with them as well is we're getting very detailed on, okay, if an incident happens, what do we do? And the last one is the board level tabletop as well. So that's how I determine or define. So if you're running a tabletop exercise, it's really about building your playbook. Okay, who does what when? Who's in the incident response team? How do we engage the incident response team? How do we call upon the incident response team if an incident happens? Then the second level is, once that playbook reaches a certain maturity stage, all right, let's actually replicate and simulate an actual incident. And this is where I see it normally gets dirty, where the technical SMEs suddenly realize, oh, okay, maybe we don't know how to resolve this. Maybe we've got, because it's one thing having all the tools and applications. You can have everything, but if you don't run them correctly, automate them correctly, and get them to sync together well, they're just tools. So that's where the war room comes in, where we're starting to ask you, okay, fine, you've got CrowdStrike, you've got Sentinel, you get the notifications, but who gets them? Who gets them on a public holiday at 3 a.m.? What do they do with them? Who do they call? How does this system integrate with that system? How do you call a war room exercise if people are, on Boxing Day and people are at a Christmas party? So that's more like your war room scenario. And then we have the board one about asking, so what is the board's responsibility during an incident? How do they support the team, and how frequently do they want to be updated? Who across the board do we update? Now, depending on how big those companies are, we get some boards that are they want to know everything that's going on, whether that's disruptive or not during an incident. It's neither here nor there, I guess, whereas you get some boards that are very hands-off and say, well, you deal with it, that's why we're paying you. And in reality, they need to be engaged and they need to be involved. But yeah, to answer you, that's what I'm seeing across the industry. Some people have the playbooks, or I say they don't because their playbooks are probably 1.5 years plus older. And some people are very mature in their playbooks. But when we do a war room situation, they realize, oh, hang on, actually the playbook says we do A, B, C. In reality, it's A, D, B. So that's where that comes in. Yes.
Right. I just think that an organization has incident response plan, all sorts of playbooks, and you go and conduct a tabletop exercise.
Yeah.
Now, what matrices do you use to evaluate the effectiveness of the tabletop exercise? Like whether it was a good exercise or a bad exercise, like what matrices do you use? Things like their responsiveness in terms of time, their decision-making accuracy.
Hard to quantify, very hard to quantify. But in the example that I told you, the way we look at it is you can never be prepared. Think of an athlete, right? Unless they start doing that thing day in, day out. We do in tabletops, we want you to do tabletops or war room exercises to a situation where you become, incident response is reflex. It's almost second nature to know what to do when. If you remember one of the slides, I said you can be as prepared as you can. Different things just keep coming up. So how do we define it? The first thing we look at is how's the team talking? When we throw a different inject, so to those that don't know, we have a scenario, you're driving down the road, going to the shops, an inject is someone rears you from behind. What do you do in that situation? Another inject is this person is crazy, they keep running across the road. How we analyze it, as we go through the different injects, we intentionally try and target the different members of the incident response teams in that inject. How's the communication across that tabletop exercise or the war room exercises? Do the team know what to do? And we usually pull out the, sort of like the go-to person, and we try and work with the 2IC. But yeah, it's hard to have a specific metric to say we measured this. But where we're trying to get with tabletop exercises is that people are comfortable to take on any challenge. I'll use the live example. Had a presentation with the strategy that I'm pushing to clients over the next year. I kind of whizzed through that. You're asking me more things that I do on day-to-day basis. I'm answering that comfortably, more confident. And if you're using that as a metric, that's where we want people to be when it comes to incident response, using tabletop exercise and war room scenarios. So it's hard to quantify to say, hey, look, they responded in 30 seconds or not. Because in reality, if we threw it in a non-live, we ran a tabletop now, we probably can get through it. But if it was a real incident, the situation might differ. But we want people to be in a place where they're comfortable, they don't panic, they know where to go, they know who to call, they know what to do and when. And they know their role during an incident. That's the ideal place we want it to be. Yeah. Actually, key quantifier, are they following their playbook? Maybe that should be the first one. Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right. Any other questions or?